Hello and welcome back to the Honest Business Podcast. I hope you are very, very well. Today is a really great episode and it's an important one because we're going to talk about business models. And we're going to talk about, is your business model the right one for you? This is something that is overlooked. It's something that people don't spend a lot of time thinking about. They make a decision maybe years and years gone by and then grow a business, build a business, but then actually maybe get to a point where they think, is my business model actually the right one? And I think the reason that this is important is because whatever your mission is, whatever your vision is, it's able to be achieved usually through multiple different formats, through multiple different business models, through multiple different kind of messages and ways of delivering something. So often business models need an update, they need a refresh, they maybe need a pivot, they maybe just need to kind of fit kind of more strategically within somebody's or a business's life cycle. And again, this is something that people, that's not, you're not going to come and say, oh, my business model need a refresh. If you do, great, but a lot of people don't. There's often a whole load of symptoms that come up that then kind of indicate that your business model is not necessarily the right one for you. And today we're going to talk through some of them and kind of go on a journey together. Go into this with an open mind. Go into this with a pen and paper. Go into this with a thought process of let's just see what happens. Maybe you're kind of set on this. Maybe you're like, yes, my business model is the right one. I've been doing this for years and years and I'm a really big expert and it goes really well. We've got a big team. And that's great, and it might be, but it also might be a nice kind of moment for you to have a look and see, actually, is there changes that need to be made here? So the business model conversation is important because if you get this right, growth and scaling is a lot easier. I see people who are struggling with the growth phase of a business or a kind of scaling season of their business. And part of the struggle comes to the fact that the business is not designed in the right way in order for them to hit their goal. Now, this ultimately is part of what I spend most of my time doing in terms of helping people from a consultant side of things, redesign things, refit things, remodel things, look at something that I call business design. And business design, to me, part of that means, how does your business model work? And that does not just mean how does your business generate money. It's much more kind of broader than that. But if you are someone who is really focused on growth or scaling, and there's this kind of pull and push going on where you feel there's a lot of resistance, you feel like you're doing all of the work and you're doing all the strategic stuff and you're carrying out all of these things that you've been told to do and it's not particularly working, yes, there are 10, 15 reasons as to why that might be, but one of them can be the business model and the structure of it not just being set correctly. And that's not me saying that the solution, therefore, is to rip it apart and create some different business model. Often it can be small tweaks. So sometimes people will come to me and it's about moving 3 or 4 key structural parts of their business model, which will therefore enable for that growth and scaling to occur. Now, the next question is, what is a business model? Because sometimes people are like, well, what does that mean? So on one hand, yes, a business model is, how does the business generate money? What is the kind of core of it? What I would also say is a business model is an understanding of, how does a business run? How is a business structured? How does it operate? And how does it all combine together? Because the combination together and the synergy piece is often the piece that doesn't get thought about and is the piece that then means that things don't sort of pan out to how somebody might want it to. So when you think about a business model, that language is interchanged throughout various different meanings, categories, areas of business if you're hearing people talk about it. So some people will say, a business model is your business a service-based business? Is it a product-based business? Is it direct to consumer? Is it B2B, business to business? Like that, for some people, is the business model conversation. For other people, it is a kind of conversation around, if you have a service business, for example, are you doing done for you services? Are you doing done with you services? Are you kind of teaching them? Is it a passive area? Some people will argue that is different business models. Again, I agree with all of that. I think yes. But I would also encourage you to go deeper than that and to look further into things about business models in general. And so a great example I like to use is, let's just say we have 3 podiatrists. So 3 different companies that are all podiatry clinics. Each of those could all have the same business model. If they're working with me, it's highly likely that each of them would have different business models. Now, their core business model might be that they provide a one-on-one treatment service with a patient who wants a kind of some sort of thing doing, I don't know, let's just say an ingrown toenail or some sort of treatment on their foot. And all of this providers may offer that. So you could say that that part of their business model is the same. The bit that will then differentiate them is when they add other things into their business model, or their business model then becomes other areas. For example, do they have some sort of rehab service attached onto it? Is there some kind of well-being group kind of program attached to it? Do they have a shop? Do they have some kind of commercial situation there? Do they have an education platform? Like, there are so many different ways that a traditional business differentiates its business model so that it runs in a different way. And the reason that that is important is because if somebody comes to me, a podiatrist, for example, and says, okay, I want to get to £2 million in revenue a year. And, you know, most podiatrists are a location dependent business in the sense of they are located in a specific area of the world and they serve a kind of 10-mile radius or a 20-mile radius of something. Then some business coaches will find all sorts of different ways for that to kind of happen. And they might look at franchising, they might look at, adding a different clinic in a different area. That's all fine, and that's definitely a viable option. But what I would be looking at is there's a whole playbook of kind of areas and tools that I would look at from their business model as to how we can create that £2 million a year in revenue, but in the most strategic way possible, in a way that fits with the owner's life, the owner's desires, their goals, their dreams. They would look at, how do we create a business model that is saleable if that's something that they want to do eventually. Like, it is not a case of when we're talking about business models that it is just this is the way that X industry has ran for X amount of years, and therefore that is the only business model available. Because that is not the case. Dentistry is similar. All sorts of, you can pretty much give me any industry, private sector, and it is very kind of simple for me to redesign and structure a business model to align with a set of goals or a set of parameters that someone sets for me. Public sector is slightly more difficult, but in recent years there has been a real shift in that, and there has been a change. So it's definitely something that I love the challenge of, and it's definitely something that is possible. So when we look at what a business model is, I argue it's how a business, what is the makeup of the business? What if you strip back everything? It's the kind of core underneath sections of a business. Often it also involves team, which a lot of people don't want to bring into it. So often it's around the amount of team, the size of team, the team or not team, the in-person team. Do you want employed team? Do you want contractors? That whole section massively influences your business model, which is again something people kind of bypass and just sort of leave to one side. But that is something that has to be in the conversation of what is a business model. So my next question to you is, I want you to think about and look at, does your business model currently actually work for you? Because this is a really important question. And I think sometimes people struggle to know whether or not it is working for them, because they're like, well, I don't know, we're making money, it's X, Y, and Z. That's fine, okay? Some people, it will be like, well, it's making money, so therefore it's working. And that's okay. But there is also a time and a place where we'll actually really understand that's not working for me, and they might not be able to pinpoint a reason as to it. So here's some parameters for you to kind of figure out what might happen for you. Like, what could be the thing that then you realize, this is not working. So I would be looking at your value system. Pull out what your values are as an individual, pull out what your values are as a business. I'd then also be looking at, what do you want from your life in the next 5 years? What do you want from a personal perspective? I'd then look at, what is the business's vision or mission, or like, what is the kind of North Star of the business, and pull that out and physically look at these, like write them out or look at them or have them on paper. And I then want you to look at, where do these connect? So where does the personal goal and the vision and the mission stuff of the business connect, and where doesn't it? Where at the minute is it like you only want to work 3 days a week, but the mission of the business is to become like the world's leading provider of something? Because anybody can look at that and say, right, well, if you're not yet the world's leading provider of something, but that's the mission and the vision of the business, but you want to work 3 days a week, then I can immediately turn around and say, well, yeah, they aren't compatible and that isn't going to necessarily work. Now, that doesn't mean it isn't possible. It means we decide on something. We decide either the business dictates the business's journey and the business is an identity in itself, or we decide you and your values therefore influence the business and the business will change to accommodate that. Now, that is a really interesting question, and it depends very much on where your business is at in its life cycle. It also depends on what the purpose of the business is. So for most people I work with, their business doesn't have a bigger identity than they do. They are the main driver for the business, and therefore they're happy for the business to pivot and to move into a way that serves them. Some of the businesses I work with, but less so of them, are a standalone item in themselves, in the sense of, what I mean by that is, like, it doesn't matter what the founder wants to do, the business mission is something, the business's goals are this, it is happening. And if you're in that gang of people, we then go down a path of figuring out, is it that you're going to change your goals or shift your goals or be flexible on them? Or are we bringing in someone to do a job that you're not necessarily going to do? So if you're working 3 days a week, what are we going to do for those other 2 or those other 3? And some of those conversations I have with people, we do have a difficult conversation where I say, well, actually, if you want to be the global leader in this industry, you're going to have to do 5 or 10 years of 6 days a week, head down, absolutely grafting, blah, blah, blah. This is not about me trying to sell you some dream and the fact of, like, yes, you can magically create this unicorn company and you're only going to work 3 days a week. Because if you listen to this, you know that that's not the case. Like, it's very, very hard for you to do that. But what it is about is having this dance with yourself and with me, potentially, where we're going through and saying, well, this could be a scenario. This could be a scenario. What does it fit for you? What makes sense? Often that conversation we just had there about, is it the brand that's leading or is it the person? It comes down to the brand. So, like, how strong is your brand? You know, like, a lot of people, do you have investment? Do you have internal stakeholders that you are required and legally bound to? So, for example, if you do have stakeholders, if you are someone who has investment, it's very unlikely that you can just decide that, oh, my personal goals are I want to work 3 days a week, therefore we're going to shift the whole business just so that it accommodates that. If you are bootstrapped and you are self-funded, you have the joy that that's probably an option. But if you are someone who does have investment, it's highly unlikely that that's going to be a possibility. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying, like, that will sometimes dictate for you what your options are. I know we're kind of going out on a tangent here, but I kind of really want to explain this so that people, hopefully, that you're really kind of resonating with what this means. So when you're figuring out, like, does the business work for you or not, you have to look at your personal endeavor, your personal intention, your personal goals, and you've also got to look at the other side of it, of the business, and the business being a being that's living. Because if your role is currently CEO in a business, you can hire a role as a CEO. So you don't have to be, you can still be the founder, but you can bring someone in as CEO to run that business. Or you can have a co-CEO, or you can have, you know, a CMO, or you can have someone else who's helping push the business forward. And that's where you get really technical and we start looking at, you know, where does your value lie within a business? Because people think that their value is, like, spread over everything and that they're so useful for everything. Well, the reality is that's unlikely. We only tend to do a certain amount of things really well, and other people can do a whole set of stuff better than us for it. Now, if we're looking at it from a small business perspective, like maybe you're listening and you're thinking, well, May, that's not me. I don't have investment. I don't want investment. I'm not building some huge thing. I'm building a business that, you know, is maybe it's 100 grand a year and under, maybe it's 200 grand a year and under. Then what you need to figure out is, how do we make this work in a way that aligns with your goals and still delivers the money or the impact, whichever's more important to you or equally as important? And how do we do that in the parameters that you set? Now, that's where I'm like a genius and a superhero, because that's where I thrive. I love people giving me a set of parameters, and then I design a business model to figure that out and to be like, look, here's your business model. What do you think about this? Do you think it's a good option? And they're like, oh my goodness, that's crazy. Or often they're just like, I can't believe you figured that out and that makes X amount of money. So really figure out, like, is this working for you right now? Down to a granular level of, if you are someone who is a service-based provider, does doing a done-for-you service where each project's requiring X amount of your time over X amount of days, over X amount of project length, is that working for you? If the answer is no, that is an interesting question to then look at your business model. That is a question where you're like, okay, the business model can shift. Because you can shift. You can shift that business model so easily, like it's doable. But it's about you identifying what does and does not work. For a lot of people, it's like they realize that they have intro offers and they have like ways of people working with them. Let's just say it's a power hour, for example. And sometimes people get to the point with me where they're like, it's not creating the impact I want to make because I don't have enough time with them. It's not it just doesn't make sense on both parties. It's not a passive thing. It requires my time. It's quite a bit of admin, blah, blah, blah. And so we decide, actually, well, that offer is not relevant, but we can create a different offer, or we can create something in its place, or we can tweak something. And that's where this works really powerful, because your business model dictates your day-to-day. Your business model dictates so much of your happiness, I'd argue. It really affects how you view your business, how you talk about your business, how your business is positioned, where you see your business going in the future. Like, people want to put that down to marketing, they want to put it down to, like a new offer and product. I'd argue it's none of that. Most of the time, it is about your business model. Yes, your positioning really comes into that, because once we've got your business model there, part of that piece of work is around how do we make sure it's positioned correctly, and how does the positioning actually kind of complement the business model that we're trying to execute on. But on the main, it is actually your business model design that is the kind of dictator of how all of those things run. Often people are working in reverse from that. So instead of looking at their business model, they're trying to solve problems, firefight, look at things that are going on. They're hiring a VA here. They're trying to hire some help to hire, with their marketing, or they're trying to get someone else to fill a gap that's hopefully going to solve a problem. When actually, if you go back 10 steps or even 100 steps, we then realize that actually there's a structural issue in the business that can be changed, tweaked, removed to make the whole thing work better and ultimately more profitable. One of the things I really find is that if a business model is not right, the profitability will be massively affected. So if your business model, I don't want to say it is not right, it's more it can be optimized, and most businesses I come into contact with, we can massively optimize their business model, their profitability will increase. It might not increase straight away, but it can increase over a kind of decent period of time, and then have a prolonged impact and effect if they sort something out, or they add something, or tweak something, or change something. And that in itself should be a reason for you to want to really look at your business model, because profitability is important, as many of you know, and as many of you feel the day-to-day kind of strain of. But if you want to take more money out of your business, which many people do who I speak to, one of the first things you need to do is look at your business model design. 1000%. So from this conversation so far, I'd love for you to really define what your business model is. So get the pen and paper out. I want you to remove the fluff. So I want you to remove, like, whatever you're going to write it all down if you want, and then cross out like the fluffy bits. And I want to know actually, like, what is it that you actually do, and how does the business work? So this is what we do. This is how the business works. This is how the business makes money. Just write really simple bullet points or a few words around those things. Cross out anything where you're like, actually, that is true, but it's fluffy. It's not necessarily the core of what we do. Like, what is it that you actually do? And then from those 3 different areas, I want you to come up with, how would you describe this to a 5-year-old? So if you're speaking to a very young human being and they say, what do you do? And you say, oh, I run a business that does X. Oh, I spend my time doing this. Or I am an expert in, and I'm really passionate about doing this. Actually, don't even say that. That third one's too complicated. Let's just say I have a business that does this. Or my business helps X person to do whatever. Like, really short and sweet. How would you describe it to a 5-year-old? Because often once we get that, we then start to actually get to the crux of what the business does. And sometimes you'll have so many things going on in your business and so many layers to it that the actual essence of it has kind of been diluted or lost, or is kind of over in a far corner somewhere, and you actually realize that's why you're kind of having maybe a struggle with scaling, or maybe it's feeling really overwhelming, or it's feeling like there's never enough time, is because there's so many things going on that the business has just evolved outside of what it's actually there to do. And that's not right or wrong. There's a decision then and a conversation to be had around what do you want to do going forward. But often it's kind of where that differentiator lies, and really kind of figuring that out is important. I'm just going to run through. Hopefully you've got something there, and we could end the episode there, but I don't want to. I want to kind of continue on with a bit of conversation. So when we're looking at, is your business model the right one? And we're looking at, how do you know that? What is the signs? What are the symptoms? Why should this matter? Something I really want to talk to you about is around differentiation from competitors. So we've talked about scalability, and we've talked about, this idea that potentially your scalability can be lacking, or can be affected, or can be a harder job than it needs to be if the business model is not necessarily correct or in a position that it needs to be in. It's not necessarily that there is a right or wrong. But the other thing that we want to talk about is this inability to differentiate from competitors. This can be something that really is like the golden ticket for people. Like when we do this work, it can be like this wow moment of they're like, oh, okay, we change this one tiny thing, or we shift the position into this, or we create the business model that revolves around something, and it immediately naturally differentiates them from competitors. And that can be such a beautiful thing. Often we spend a lot of time looking, as business owners, about how do we differentiate? What's the USP? What's our angle? And sometimes it's as simple as, it doesn't need to be a really clever thing. It can just be the business model shifts, and the business model's kind of identity therefore dictates the differentiation for us. And that can happen quite easily. I think people are quite skeptical about that, and they think, is that really possible? Is it going to happen? There's some really cool examples of where differentiation can really come to play and can really hit in. Like, it's just a really interesting one. I'd also argue that you don't want to get hung up on differentiation from competitors. People sometimes so hung up on like, how do we be different? I don't think it's a case of like, don't change your business model just to differentiate from your competitors, but it's a nice kind of secondary impact, and a nice secondary reason and supporting reason to make a change if you need to. There is another side to this, in the sense of your business model can struggle to generate revenue. Let's just talk about that. So if you want to generate consistent revenue and you struggle with either customer acquisition or customer retention, that can be an interesting one to delve into in terms from a business model perspective. Some business models will be set up so that you can generate initial revenue quite simply, but this idea of consistency and of retention can be really lacking. And that's where we'll look at a business model and we'll kind of change this. And this is applicable, right? Whether you're making 20 grand a year, or whether your business is generating 10 million, 20 million, 100 million a year. Like, this is a similar process you go down. It's just the components of it change as the scale gets bigger. But this idea of like customer acquisition can be hugely aided or kind of repelled from how the business is set up to achieve. I think also, if you're going to look at what changes do we make, because if you're at this point now and you're thinking, well, actually, maybe the business model isn't set up completely right and it needs to change, it needs to shift, giving yourself permission to do that is one of the most important things. Hopefully this episode is helping to facilitate that, but really giving yourself permission to say, it's okay that we've built this thing for however long and now we're randomly going to change it, or we're just going to add this other thing into it. And that feels scary, and it can feel wrong, sometimes it can feel like, we're doing the right thing. I just want to give you permission that it's okay to test things, it's okay to try things, it's okay to see what works and what doesn't. But also take a real moment to look at, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the business right now? What is it that you do really well? What is it that you don't? What is it where we drop the mark on? Like, really getting clear and honest with yourself around the business model strengths and weaknesses really allows for you to then start making decisions based on fact and based on data, versus just based on like sort of craziness of thought or craziness of like, wow, we've got this mad idea, or someone's been to a conference and we, so and so's business is doing that, so we're going to do that. Like, this is not what I'm suggesting you do. I'm suggesting you look at it from a real objective perspective. Often this is why hiring a consultant like me and helping to do this work is useful, because it keeps the kind of neutrality there and it helps to bring you back to not getting sort of excited and running away with all the possibilities and what might happen. There's another kind of interesting way of doing this in the sense of gathering information. Try and gather as much information from clients, from employees, from customers, from stakeholders. Like, what is their thoughts on X thing that you might change, or X thing that you're unsure of whether or not that's actually productive or not? Like, that can be a really useful piece of the pie to kind of incorporate into your theory and to kind of test your hypotheses on whatever it is that you're looking to do. And once you have decided that you are going to make a change, I'd really suggest that you try and come up with, and this is a bit that nobody really does, but I think is really critical if you're serious about testing the effectiveness of this, is that you look at what are your key performance indicators to tell you that this has worked or this is successful, so that you can start measuring, if we make this change, is there a positive impact? And in some businesses that will be easier to do than others, but all businesses can create key performance indicators for change management. And in this case, it's around, key performance indicators of the business model of how do we measure success of that? Because what one person values as an important measure, another business is going to say it's not useful to them. So it's very bespoke in the sense of what is it that you want to measure and what is it that you're valuing, and kind of connecting the dots to. I would be very careful when you're doing this work and you're looking at, business model tweaks and changes. Be very careful not to fall into the trap of what is a trend right now and, what is the done thing to do. Because some people will interpret this episode incorrectly and will take what I'm sharing as a meaning and as a kind of gateway to say, yes, change up your business all the time and add new things in and change your business model because the trend is this and customer behavior is shifted to this, so that therefore means you're going to change this. That is not what I am suggesting to you. That is not what I am saying is a good thing to do. Yes, adapting to consumer behavior is important. Yes, changing your marketing to suit where a market is lying is important. But in terms of a structural discussion around business models, I am not saying that you need to go and kind of look for market trends and kind of constantly be adapting to that. Some businesses, that is their business model, therefore it makes sense. Some of you run on a trend-based marketing system. Some of you run on a trend-based kind of business model. That's fine, but that is not the majority of businesses. And the majority of businesses don't have the resource or the capacity or the kind of skill set behind it to be able to do that, because it's an exhausting task and it's a one that you have to be. It comes with a lot of risk and it comes with a lot of decisions to be made at a fast pace. So just be very careful of, yes, you can look at case studies. Yes, you can find examples of where people have pivoted their business model or where they've shifted something or where they've changed something. And you can definitely use that to influence kind of what you see as possible. But just be very aware of, am I making this decision for the right reasons and from a basis that makes sense from a long-term business success idea and platform? Or are you making it based on a kind of short-term hit, short-term kind of win, a short-term thing because that's going to work for the next 6 months, but then once the market changes again, it's not going to work and therefore you're going to pivot again? Just be aware of those two things as separate individual as options, because they are two different things. Let's just talk very briefly about if you're actually going to do this. Yeah, let's just talk very briefly. So if you've got to the end of this episode and you're now like, I think the business model does need a shift, it does need to change, whether that's a full pivot or whether that's just tweaks, changes, additions, removing some things, that's fine. It doesn't need to be a massive thing. In fact, the least you can do with it normally, the better. Kind of the smaller tweaks and testing them can be better than having some huge, massive thing where you're like, right, we're changing the whole thing. If you're at a point where you've decided, for that to happen. Do not just do this overnight. I would really encourage, especially if you have a team of people, that you have to think about this carefully. There's a lot of communication needs to be involved. There's a lot of forward thinking needs to happen. There's a lot of planning in terms of timelines and, changes and publicly announcing things and your brand positioning. And there's a lot of areas that you need to focus on and think about if you're in that camp. If you're in someone who's a one-man band who can change things, and make decisions there and then on the day, great. I would still suggest that you think about things. You have a kind of mull them over. You look at, do forecasting, look at longer term, like what does this mean for the business? Not in the next 6 months, but in the next 2 or 3 years. Now, I understand that if you are in the camp of you're a one-man band, it's highly likely that you will change again within that 2 or 3 years. That's fine. I'm not saying you have to stick to it forever. But what I am saying is, like, I sometimes get clients who come to me at the point of, I have made these changes constantly for years and years and years, and I've pieced all these things together, and now they want to get a business model that is really functional and really works for them. And I'm sort of sat there thinking, okay, great. And they're also sat there thinking, okay, great. And then they kind of do this piece of work, and then they're thinking, I wish I'd kind of come a year ago or a year and a half ago because I could have had this sorted out. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, because often we need to grow as people, the business needs to grow, we need to mature in our kind of message and understand where we sit, and there's a whole load of things as to why, the perfect timing doesn't exist. But just be really careful that you aren't just constantly repeating this idea of the business model needs refreshing, the business model needs refreshing, when actually it doesn't. It might be a whole other kind of collection of things for you to look at. I would highly suggest, if you are listening to this and you have enjoyed this episode, but you are at a point where you're like, yeah, we're ready to add something in here. We want to be more profitable. We want to add, we want to make the business more stable. That's another thing that's really important. Like, some people want a more stable business and a more robust business, so that if something like, for example, COVID happened again, which, hopefully it's not going to, but, if some kind of thing happened in the world, that they could stand on their own 2 feet and they could continue to generate revenue in a different way. And often diversification is something that I spend time with people doing to make sure that their business can hold a stronger place in the market, depending on whatever kind of potential issue might occur, which you can't predict all of them, but you can predict some kind of things that may happen. If that is you, I would suggest coming and speaking with me. This kind of work is really important, and it can help you. It really is the stuff that is life-changing, because if you get this right, so many of those big bucket list dreams and thoughts and ambitions, that's how they come to life. It's through this work. And as much as many people will want to believe that it's through having this, massive sales launch, or it's having this big kind of growth in the team, the reality of it is if the business is not set up correctly to get you what you want, or to get the business what it's trying to do, then you will forever be on the cycle of, okay, next push, next push, next push. We'll get to the next thing. We'll get to this thing. Like, it does not work long term to just keep adding random things. It's about you being really refined, being really clear on what you're going after, being really clear on what is the purpose of this. And that will get you way further, way quicker than it will if you just keep pushing random things together. And so if that's something you want to come and explore with me, doing something like a half day together is really powerful, and we can nail this down. It might be that you want to come work with me one-on-one for like 6 months, and we will create the strategy together, but then you will then have support with me as we go through implementation, because often that might be the kind of worry. You might think, oh God, I don't actually know how we're going to, as a team, successfully implement that. That's where I can sit with you for 5-6 months or longer if we need to, and create this idea of how do we implement this well, profitably, and in a way that all stakeholders are going to get on board with and are really happy with. And it also might be, if you are someone in the kind of, you prefer group support, Maze Accelerator is a great option. Depending on when you're listening to this, enrollment kind of opens at 2 points of the year. But if you're listening to this as it's being published, there's a new cohort launching in June 2024 for a kickstart on the 1st of July 2024. So that is available to you. And that can be if you like working in a group space, that can be really beneficial for you. And we can work over a kind of 6-month period together to really figure out where you're going and getting this moving. This work is the kind of stuff I do with people all the time. This is my most kind of core piece of work. It's the stuff I enjoy doing the most. I love presenting a business model to someone and saying, hang on a minute, this is what it could look like, and this is how much money you can make, and this is how much you can take home, and this is how we can implement that. And helping people to create that. When I've seen some insane transformations, people, I've seen some incredible business model shifts and changes and tweaks that have given clients so much of their life back, has given them so many of their goals ticked off, has given them so much joy in their day-to-day. Like, it is transformational, this work, and I really suggest that you explore it and you take it seriously and you think, actually, yeah, what is the possibility of this? Because I think it could be huge, and I know it's huge. So if you need any word for it, I'm the person to be like, yes, it is huge, and it can change so much for you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's been a joy to talk with you today. Feel free to go and look at some of the other podcast episodes that are available to you. There's over 100. There are so many. And there's quite a few on this similar topic. So go and have a look for pivoting or scaling or tweaking. I think we've got some about how to change, is it time to change? Is it time to move on? There's some really good episodes that will complement this one. I will be back next week with a new episode. I hope you have a fantastic one. Please leave me a review or share on socials or do something if you've enjoyed this episode. But leaving a review is a great one, or a comment if you're watching on YouTube. And I will speak to you soon. Take care. Bye.